Hi, everyone, and welcome to our panel on Speeding Towards Equitable Instruction, Special Education Embodied Design for Sensory Diversity. In this panel, myself and my colleagues, Rachel Chen and Christina Krause, will be sharing 3 projects that share a design-based research framework that we call Special Education Embodied Design, or SPEED. I'll start with some brief framing around SPEED before we get into the projects. SPEED begins from the question: what are the implications of sensory diversity for instructional design? Given that learners bring different sensoria to the classroom, how do we design a learning experience that's equitable for everyone? We are hardly the first to query how to cater education to sensory diversity. However, our theoretical alignment gives us reason to question popular definitions of instructional accessibility. Common implicit and explicit frameworks in educational accessibility today tend to view presenting information in an alternate format, such as providing deaf students with sign language interpreters at a spoken lecture, as equivalent. The assumption is that at the end of the day, students are learning the same content, regardless of how they learn it. We propose that the equivalence of these experiences is problematized by a growing body of cognitive science research on embodied cognition. According to embodied cognition theory, the nature of our bodily engagements with the world shape our cognitive structures. The body shapes and participates in the activity of the mind. Of particular relevance to today's projects is the subtheory of enactivism. Enactivism challenges prior views that perception and action are the input and output of human knowing and thinking. Rather, perception and action are the very stuff that knowing and thinking are made of. Furthermore, rather than a sequential process where sensation triggers processing and consequently action, perception and action unfold together and mutually inform one another moment to moment. With repetition, the sensory motor patterns supporting action give rise to cognitive structures. This suggests that how we interact actually shapes what we learn. An enactivist perspective inspires new ways of approaching design wherein the body is centered as instructional nexus. The embodied design framework, originating from Dora Abrahamson, codifies the implications of enactivism for educational design. Embodied design aims to create the conditions for learners to develop and signify new sensory motor schemes. Designers start from learners' existing resources, including their sensory motor capabilities and capacity for perceptual judgments. They then render target concepts as phenomena that learners can explore using these existing resources. Disciplinary forms such as symbolic artifacts and measurement instruments are then introduced as potential tools to enhance regulation, evaluation, or explanation of learners' initial responses. To make this a bit more concrete, an example of embodied design is the Mathematics Imagery Trainer for Proportion, the MITP. In the MITP, learners manipulate the heights of 2 bars, in this case on a touch screen, in this example. The screen bars start out red, and the learners are given the goal of trying to figure out how to turn them green and then how to move their hands continuously while keeping them green. Now, the color feedback actually depends on the height of the student's hands in relation to one another, following a predetermined ratio that is unknown to the students. In this case, the screen turns green if and only if the distance of the right token to the bottom of the screen is twice that of the left. So moving in green requires participants to move the right hand twice as fast as the left, with the gap between them growing as they move their hands up the screen. Later, cultural artifacts such as a grid and numbers are introduced as resources in the control and discourse about these new movement forms. This brings us to SPEED. SPEED considers what it means to do embodied design with populations currently served by the special education system in the US, focusing on learners' sensory motor diversities and how these interact with aspects of instructional design. The principles of SPEED are as follows. 1, learning happens through the body's sensory motor engagement with the world. 2, learning begins from learners' existing embodied resources, which are things like their prior sensory motor experiences, practices, processes, and abilities. particularly their strengths. 3, instruction must flexibly adapt to learners' sensory motor diversities. SPEED takes up disability studies' commitments to embrace and celebrate human variation, challenge notions of normalcy, and recognize social dimensions of disability. SPEED actively centers learners whose educational potential is often not centered in the design of general education. SPEED requires attention to how learners vary in their sensory motor experience and how such diversities give rise to different cognitive architectures. SPEED's theoretical foundations in embodied cognition thus offer an opportunity to take educational accessibility in new directions and rethink the equity of the quality of engagement we're offering learners with their peers and with conceptual learning. SPEED is a design-based research framework. The types of learning we want to study are not yet observable in naturalistic settings, so design-based research offers a structure to create them. This Escher drawing shows 2 hands, each drawing the other into being with a pen. Like these hands, design-based research creates theory-informed designs, which in turn feed back into theory in an iterative cycle. The ultimate fruits of design-based research are both new insights into theory and the development of new practices. Central to the SPEED framework is an attention to assumptions and attitudes about the relevance of different modalities to disciplinary instruction. We introduce the term modalism to refer to all instances of privileging dominant modalities over others, ignoring other possible modal constitutions. Modalism thus encompasses audism, which supremacizes spoken language, oculocentrism, which supremacizes vision, and many forms of ableism, which supremacize a normative body. We are inspired by work like that of Abrahamson, Flood, Sue, and Neely's 2019 paper in ZDM Math Education, which critiques how commonly used accessibility approaches for blind and visually impaired students, such as tactile diagrams and text-to-speech, function as mere replications of visual representations rather than authentic opportunities for spatial understanding. Special education populations frequently engage the world in ways that differ from neuromajority individuals through modalities that are not traditionally privileged as ways of learning. SPEED invites starting from these embodied practices of learners in these modalities and offering rich guiding opportunities for dynamic interaction. We parameterize this dynamic interaction according to 3 intertwined and interacting dimensions of experience. Medium or media, which is the material substrates like pen and paper, tablet interface, or the body. Modality delineates the sensory motor systems recruited, so sensory such as visual, auditory, tactile, proprioceptive, vestibular, and motor, so manual, oral, or whole body could be examples of modality. Semiotic mode refers to a symbolic system of meaning making. So this might be signed language, gesture, or mathematical symbols. From an activist perspective, media modalities and semiotic modes and the reciprocal relations among them act as interdependent constraints upon the perception action loop. In turn, these factors mold what cognitive structures can take shape.